We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. We start this week by paying tribute to everyone who works so hard making this programme a success, particularly the incredibly talented makeup ladies who managed to transform this into this. OK, coming up. Karan thinks you can't argue with the facts on Brexit. Maajid says kids should be able to dress up as anything they like, regardless of race. Afua argues it's OK not to wear a poppy. And Michelle wants big companies to start taking more responsibility when it comes to our rubbish. But first, it's been a sad, bad, shoddy week at Westminster. The sex scandal claimed its first scalp in Michael Fallon, who's resigned as Defence Secretary. Earlier this week, Labour activist Bex Bailey said she was raped at 19, but claimed she was told to hush it up by party officials as it would damage her career. A list of various allegations against MPs is doing the rounds online. An avalanche of women claim to have been affected. Apparently this all adds up to the mass sexual persecution of women at the heart of our democracy. But is that really how it is? Let me be clear. No sexual predator should ever be given cover. Rape and sexual abuse are violent crimes that should be dealt with by the police. But should Michael Fallon lose his job because he touched someone's knee 15 years ago? It's vital to make the distinction between sexual abuse and inappropriate behaviour. Banter, a crude joke, a touch of the knee is not sexual assault. Suggesting it is turns women into victims and it disempowers us. Let's teach women to take back the power, to stand up to the idiots in the office, to say loudly and clearly if they're not OK with something. Because only then will it stop.
Carole, first of all, I agree with you that sexual assault is very serious and that any culture of predatory behaviour is completely inappropriate and potentially criminal and has no place in the heart of democracy, whether it's men or women who are perpetrating that behaviour. But there seems to be, as always in these cases, a pattern where the majority of people accused of this kind of behaviour are men and the majority of victims apparently are women, and a lot of these allegations aren't substantiated yet. The problem I have with some of the rhetoric, and please tell me if I'm wrong in putting any of this on you, is that this expectation that it's up to women to be really strong and resilient and resist this kind of behaviour. And while I think it's great if women can be really strong and resilient, and the idea of somebody who's vulnerable being affected by this is horrific, equality is not when women are allowed to be strong enough to resist male advances. Equality is when a woman can be weak or vulnerable and she doesn't get subject to this kind of behaviour. And so that's what I've been really uncomfortable with, the idea that as long as women are tough and bat this away or speak out straight away, then everything is fine. And actually the onus is on men who are behaving this way. That's where it belongs.
Of course it is. I mean, of course men shouldn't do it. In a perfect world, men wouldn't do this, but they do. And I just think women in any arena, you know, you don't have to be strong to say to a guy, don't do that. You know, if a guy is coming on to you, guys are always going to come on to women. It's going to happen.
I would dispute that, though. You just said you don't have to be strong to say to a guy, don't do that.
Well, I think you don't.
If you're a junior girl in an office or wherever workplace, and you have a senior boss that is a man who's making you feel uncomfortable, if you're like what we are, Carole, we are confident individuals, and I'm sure that we would take it very lightly saying, get off. If you're somebody who's just entered your career, you're quite shy as a person and there's different personalities, it actually is quite a courageous and brave thing to say to your boss, who is your senior, please don't do that. No, Carole, so my point is, people are different, and as a woman, certainly as a young girl and someone who's shyer than perhaps that we are, or maybe less confident or whatever, it is a big deal to have the bravery to say, stop that, and we need to recognise that.
The kind of women you're talking about, the kind of women who have no power or in positions where they have no power, they have an HR department that can go to that. The people
Not always.
Well, the people we're talking about this week are women in Westminster. We've got to be pretty tough to get to
somebody
Westminster.
who works in Westminster.
Yeah.
Let's be clear, it's not Sexminster.
Exactly.
The
Westminster.
overall people do behave, and when you sign up to public life, you have to sign up to the Nolan principles of public life, you know, which is selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership.
Yep.
And these scandals there's nothing new about it. I mean, you have to go back to the Profumo scandal that brought down a government. But there, the individual actually lied to Parliament. Then you look at the 1990s and the Conservative Party then, the sleaze that was one thing after another and horrific, horrible stories that brought down that government. And now we've got this. And the expenses scandal that took place in 2009, if you remember that, every single day. I mean, they literally, it was like dripping it out
but
one by one.
There's no comparison between that and what's happening.
So what is happening now is this has now come out, and the list, and again, it's cross-party. This is not something that's just Conservative, or it's Conservative, Labour, Liberal. Everyone is involved in this, and it should not be allowed or tolerated at all.
Can I say, it strikes me that there's certainly, I was, for one, surprised, though I have been both a victim of sexual assault and in a Daily Mail sting, accused of something during the election campaign. I've been on both sides of this debate, and it strikes me there certainly is. I was surprised by the extent of the problem that we quite evidently have. On the other hand, pragmatically, I'm not so sure that there is a pragmatic solution to this apart from what Carole's suggesting, even though I agree with you, Afua, it's not comfortable to hear that, and I would side with you on my emotions around what Carole's suggesting. And the reason I'm suggesting there's no other pragmatic solution is that for the vast majority of these cases, they're simply, in a court of law, there isn't that standard of evidence that can withstand the principle innocent until proven guilty. And with that in mind, the only other solution, because we don't have the evidence available for the vast majority of these cases, is for education, training, and that kind of empowerment to say to women, you must feel like you can say no, because the problem, and it's a problem, I don't think this is a comfortable thing for me to say, it is a problem that we've got a kind of culture that expects somebody in a position that isn't of power to actually speak up and say no, but short of having concrete evidence or video cameras, it is the only pragmatic solution.
And what's happening now is the names of people are being circulated, not just in this country, but around the world. The people on that list are everywhere now. And these are people, 16 of the names on that list are people who are in consensual relationships. There are other people on that list who are having affairs, legitimately having affairs. But these people are being damned to hell and back without any form of redress.
Part of the problem with the list is that victims, alleged victims, are being outed without their consent as well. So I think we can all agree the list is very problematic. The
people you're talking about have spoken out.
No, there are many people named on that list who said they had no intention of speaking publicly about this and they don't want to. So they've been violated by the
people who've compiled the list. And that's the other thing. It's anonymous. We don't know exactly who's compiled this list either.
Well, look, I would certainly not. I was a child. I was abused. I would certainly not want to name who I'm speaking of. And I wouldn't want somebody to take that right away from me, that without my permission.
That's one of the difficulties, isn't it? It is a context where people still don't feel sometimes that they can speak out. 80% of sexual assaults and rapes are not reported to the police. It's estimated because, as a victim, you know that the consequences of reporting it are that you might have to give evidence. There will be consequences. It will be associated with your name. In this case, people haven't been kept anonymous. I just quickly want to pick up on what Maajid was saying about the cultural change, because I think that is really important. And actually, I've got a more light-hearted, well, you could argue that it's light-hearted image I wanted to show you of David Davis, the Brexit secretary. Not that long ago, and even though I'm not in any way suggesting that David Davis has been implicated in any sexual assault, there's no allegation I'm aware of against him.
You think that's wrong? There's something wrong with
I think it's part of the culture where women's bodies are commodified within Westminster. That is problematic.
How can you say women's bodies are commodified? It's being told to get close to the woman for the photograph.
Yes, that is problematic, and they've got his name.
But it's people who say stuff like that really makes me cross, because what you're doing is you're ignoring the real sexual assault. Yes, you are. You're conflating that with what happened to Bex Bailey.
With Bex Bailey, perhaps here's an example we can all agree on. So Bex Bailey, what she said, and let's listen to it.
I was seriously sexually assaulted at a Labour Party event by, it wasn't an MP, but someone who was more senior to me. It took me a while. It took me a while to summon up the courage to tell anyone in the party, but when I did, I told a senior member of staff who told me that, or it was suggested to me that I not report it.
So, I mean, it's got to be said at this stage, the Labour Party have issued a statement about those allegations. They've said the Labour Party takes these allegations extremely seriously. We would strongly recommend that the police investigate the allegations of criminal actions that Bex Bailey has made. Labour will also launch an independent investigation into claims that a party employee acted improperly over these 2011 allegations. But it is a good example to demonstrate the culture change that needs to happen, because if these allegations are true, Bex Bailey should never have been told not to take it forward.
But also, the stories in the paper today that there are more allegations being made by people in the Labour Party, girls just like Bex Bailey, which are far more serious than the kind of stuff that Michael Fallon has resigned about. I mean, I just spoke to Katie Perriot today, the former Director of Communications in Downing Street, and she said, we're all sitting here waiting for an announcement of what Michael Fallon has actually done, because there has to be something more than this.
He said when he resigned that it was also
because... He said he had behaved improperly,
he couldn't rule out that there might be other...
Exactly.
He said inappropriately.
But the point is, it's not just this one incident.
Exactly.
And not just one incident. It implies there are other things that have happened that he has not said. Because his very words are other things. And also he linked it... The other important thing is he linked it to the armed forces. And it's very important. The Secretary of State for Defence, you are basically representing the armed forces. And they said, we've had this situation with the submarines. And you know, there are certain rules, and you cannot have relationships. And there were relationships involving officers, and people have been suspended. People will probably have to leave the Navy as a result of it. I mean, my father was in the Indian Army, and I remember he took a very important posting. And the reason he was posted is the officer before that, a senior general, had misbehaved in this manner, and it was just not accepted. And immediately he was, and my father had to go and clean up the whole situation. So this is not tolerated in any area. And also, there must be the openness. I mean, I talked about the Nolan principle. Part of it is openness. People must have the ability, the confidence to speak out.
But don't you think there's a sense of panic at the moment? Don't you think there's a sense of panic, and it's all moving too quickly? And there's a danger that Theresa May is going to do something and try and make it better, and just do it too quickly, when actually there is no need to. This kind of behaviour can be stamped out by women themselves, and you don't have to be strong to tell a bloke to get his hand off your knee.
It's not responsibility to stamp this out.
But it isn't. But you're responsible for yourself, surely, Afua.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, I would just make my final point, which is we need to be careful that everything's not conflated together, because talking about a rape is really serious.
Yes, absolutely.
And we need to make sure that actually, so if I think about the workplace, I like banter.
Yes,
I love banter. If someone oversteps the line, I'm confident enough to tell them no, and I would hope that they would do the same with me. And I think that we've got to be careful that we're separating serious, you know, and real and genuine harassment and assault from things that other people may be comfortable with. Because for me, sexual harassment is very simple. If someone's doing something to you that you're not comfortable with, that is a problem, and there needs to be mechanisms and frameworks to report that if you so need to.
So we're going to have to move this on to the next topic, also related to Westminster. On Sunday, the Labour MP Barry Sherman provoked an outcry when he said that those who voted Remain in last year's referendum were the better educated people in our country. Many Leave voters felt that he was suggesting they weren't bright enough to understand the issues that came up in the referendum. To quote Conservative MP Mike Wood, statistics from YouGov and elsewhere show very clearly that the vast majority of university graduates voted to Remain, whereas many people with GCSEs or lower voted to leave. These are the facts. As it happens, I think we were all ill-informed about the decision we made in June last year. There were just 4 months between the referendum being announced and polling day. Far too little time to make an informed, permanent decision about a hugely complex issue spanning over 40 years of the UK-EU relationship. I'm in the thick of it, and I'm still learning about Brexit every day. For this reason, I think we will have to hold a second referendum before the process is done.
I think it's pretty shameful that people like Barry Sherman and others are turning the Brexit debate into a Remain brackets university smart and Leave thick and stupid, because it's not like that, you know. Education comes in all forms. And it must be really galling for university-educated people around this table and out there to understand that the great unwashed, and I count myself among them, who didn't go to university, actually just secured the biggest democratic vote in British history. You know, you said before that you talked about the degrees. You know, higher education just below the degree. 53% of leavers had that, 47% remain. So it's not just people with GCSEs. And I just think, you know, everyone would... this kind of snobbery, this kind of sneering at people who didn't go to university, the fact that they're somehow less than the people who did, it's actually... And, you know, let's look at some of the so-called intelligent people and some of the predictions they made before the referendum. These really highly intelligent, university-educated people said there would be 3 million job losses. We'd each be 4,300 quid worse off, 10% drop in GDP, immediate and prolonged recession, stock market crash, oh yes, and World War III. And none of it happened. And that's the smart people. The smart people, the clever, university-educated people in the OECD have had to apologise for some of the stuff they said. Totally wrong.
So not wrong. They may be right in due course. That's another matter.
Well,
but there are the facts, and the facts are that the YouGov statistics are very clear. Remain 30%, leave 70% for GCSE or lower, and for degree, remain 68%, leave 32%. And these are the Brexit fault lines. If you do an analysis, there are fault lines. I mean, for example, young versus old. The young predominantly voted to remain, the old to leave. If you look at it from, these are Harvard Business School statistics that in January, upper middle class and middle voted to remain, working class, unemployed voted to leave. Pro-immigration, remain, anti-immigration, leave. So there are these Brexit fault lines, of which this is one of them. Now, these are the facts.
I think on the... please.
Well,
I'll come in.
Go on. I'll let a Remainer come in, and then I'll come in after a Remainer. I'll be generous. Yeah.
Well, I was attempting to answer the so what question because it got asked twice, and I think actually it wasn't the Remainers that made it about the so what. It was the reaction to Barry Sherman simply reading out facts, and facts don't care about your feelings. Let's not be snowflakes. Let's not get triggered just because something's in some statistics somewhere. You know, we're often, as Ramonas, complained about for being triggered by things that Brexiteers say. It appears to me like the people that did make a so what kind of fuss about this and pointing to the implications were the Brexiteers themselves. Let's hear Barry Sherman speaking about it and listen to the reaction.
The truth is that when you look at who voted to remain, most of them were the better educated people in our country. The people.
Oh, what? No, that is controversial. Massively controversial.
Absolutely, I think it's absolutely true. You could actually see the pattern. All the university towns, all the university towns voted remain.
And my point there, guys, is it was the Brexiteers that got triggered. They're the ones that made a big deal about it.
All he was doing... He's telling us we're stupid.
No, he wasn't. He didn't use the word stupid. All he was doing was saying, this is a fact, a bit like younger people voted.
One of the points that I was making right up front, one of the points I was making right up front is, educated, not educated, we were ill-informed, uninformed about Brexit. Give 4 months for the whole country to understand this hugely complex subject. I asked a former head of the civil service, who's one of my colleagues on the crossbenches in Parliament. I asked him, and he had to go and talk to David Davis, and David Davis said, so how long is it going to take to implement all these changes if we have to go and leave the European Union? He said, if you want me to be optimistic, 10 years. More realistically, 15 years. I mean, this is a very complex issue, and how are people meant to understand this in such a short time?
Did you campaign against the referendum taking place? Did you use your position and influence to stop it happening?
It was a big mistake to have the referendum in the first place, and it was a big mistake to have it in the way that it is. But as a parliamentarians, we have to take responsibility because we voted for the referendum to take place.
My question is, if you feel very strongly that it was too rushed and all the rest of it, prior to the referendum being, given to us, did you actively campaign to try and stop there being a referendum, or did you try and campaign during that period to pro-Remain?
I think everybody underestimated...
No, you're not answering my question.
I'm saying I didn't campaign, and I said I said we take responsibility as parliamentarians.
Okay.
It should never have been rushed through in the way that it is, and that's why I think, logically, when the time comes, people are more informed day by day. Then, when there's a deal or no deal, people have to be given the chance to make that on a more informed basis to make the decision. Call it referendum part B, call it second referendum. The public have to have that say if we respect the will of the people.
People reacted so bad to Barry Sherman because he's in a constituency in Huddersfield that 54.7% voted to leave. He betrayed those people and he made
By quoting facts?
Because of the implication of what he said, and you know that's what I'm saying.
But I'm a Brexiteer and I'm not triggered. I'm not angry when I hear that. No, I'm quite chilled out. Yeah. But the reason I'm not triggered is because, to be fair, all he was doing is pointing out a fact, and I'm not, I can take that.
Why did he feel the need to do that, Michelle, do you think?
Well, because I don't know why he felt the need to do that, but I don't take from that somehow I don't feel that I don't feel like a person who's got a degree in puppetry has more of a say over what goes on in this country than I do, because I've got a GCSE. Yeah. What I do find quite interesting is that all of the people who are now wanting to focus on university educations are very similar to the same kind of people, and often they are the same people who are campaigning to get the voting age reduced. So they want people who are 16 who, often might not even have a GCSE to be able to have a vote. So for me, there's a massive contradiction there. You can't focus on the voting quality of someone with a degree whilst equally saying, come and enter the system.
Look at prime ministers. I mean, Churchill never had a degree. John Major never had a degree. So no one is saying whether having a degree... The point I'm making is everybody is ill-informed. We all need to be more informed about this subject.
The point he was making, the reason people reacted badly, is that he said, what is a university degree? What is an academic education? It's the ability to remember and repeat information that you've been told about.
It's much more than that. University education teaches you to think, to question, to reason. It's much more than that.
You don't think that happens in life? You don't think that happens in people's living rooms every day?
You
don't think that happens?
Denigrate education in that way.
All you who went to university.
Can I say?
Well, I struggled hard to get to university. My family aren't wealthy, and I studied from comprehensive school. I've never been to private school in my life. I ended up at the University of London, both for my degree, undergraduate, and my master's. And I know for a fact, having been through it, you can't say it's just about memorising and repeating. And it's actually... Hold on, last thing, and I think Afua wants to come in last. I'm not saying that. That's a bunch of straw men. Nobody said that. But please, for everyone who's watching, who is considering and contemplating going to university, it's important that they don't think it's a waste of their time. Education is important.
Our universities are the best in the world, along with America. And I think who go to university is a benefit not to themselves, but to the whole country as well.
But all these better educated people would do well to remember that the people who grow their food, the people who serve them in restaurants, the people who fix their cars and fix their boilers are not stupid, uneducated.
Thank you.
Like she has a problem getting in normally. No, she doesn't.
Carole, let Afua talk.
I have to admit, when I heard what your topic was, Karen, my initial reaction was, this is a bit unhelpful, because I know that it's going to be interpreted as Remainers being snobby towards Brexiteers and claiming some kind of monopoly over the facts. But having heard this debate, I'm really glad you raised it, actually, because... No offence, Carole, but you just sound completely hysterical.
Do I?
You've just been presented with a set of facts, right? That's all they are, a set of facts. And actually, on top of that, a very reasonable argument that both sides could have done with being better informed.
Stop with the set of facts.
I've been waiting for 10 minutes to get a word in because you've been shrieking at all of us about the facts.
I've been shrieking.
I have been trying to speak, and every time I have, you have gone on another rant about the fact
that... shrieking, screaming.
Shall I tell you an interesting fact?
I actually give up. I actually give up.
I've got an interesting fact to change the subject. In 1603, did you know, because I didn't know this, that if you was an Oxford grad, you were entitled to 2 votes. So you had 1 for your residency and 1 for your university seat. There you go.
Talking of double standards, we have to nudge this on a bit.
Okay.
Because they're back. Certain white, middle-class, racial justice activists with too much time on their hands have decided to exploit Halloween to push their ideological dogma. Apparently, dressing your white children up as non-white characters is cultural appropriation and somehow racist. One activist said she talked her daughter out of dressing up as the Polynesian Moana because she wasn't from the Pacific Islands, or even Elsa from Frozen because she also wasn't blonde. Poor daughter. But how far do you take it? If dressing like Moana isn't allowed, what about those who wrote the story or even animated it? The kind of world this creates is the opposite of anti-racist. If these people had their way, we'd all be segregated cultures in silos, and we, people of colour, would be deemed authentic only if we aped the crudest of stereotypes about our cultures. Jamaicans with dreadlocks, Muslim women covering their faces. Cultural appropriation as a concept is racism, dressed up as anti-racism. I say white children looking up to role models from people of colour is a good thing. They're not doing it out of mockery. This is not blackface. We should all participate in and celebrate different cultures rather than designate and isolate them.
So, Maajid, I actually agree with you. So if I focus on, for example, the Halloween costume element of your conversation, I love Halloween. I will, be the first in there to get into fancy dress. I think it's wonderful. And, I had somebody, I went to a Halloween party, and there was a person that was dressed up, and they were very heavily made to look like they were burnt. And somebody was saying, I find that deeply offensive, because what if you are, a burns victim? And so depending on which avenue you go down, there's always a reason why someone can feel offended by something, and sometimes they're valid and sometimes they're not. I'm of the mindset that I actually think about what is the intent behind people doing whatever it is that they're doing. And more often than not, people don't have bad intentions. People don't want to upset people. So I think that we've just got to be careful that we're not getting too overly sensitive and too easily offended, where the offence and the racism and things that people describe is just not meant. So I agree with you.
I mean, you end up in the kind of world where that offence is then policed. I mean, in King's College now, they have what they're calling safe space marshals, who are patrolling speeches. They did it with Jacob Rees-'s Mogg speech. 5 paid-for marshals, paid for by King's College, just there to make sure that nobody was offended by what he said. And it's like, look, I have been a political prisoner in Egypt. I've witnessed torture. Halloween is a time where I see things that that remind me of things I saw in prison. I'm not going to turn up and say to people in a Halloween party, you can't dress like that because it reminds me of certain things I've seen.
You see, this is what I think what is dangerous is there's political correctness, and then there's political correctness when it goes too far. And I think what's happened in the whole world now is we've gone and tipped over. And when it goes too far, it actually is exactly the opposite of what it's trying to achieve. It becomes almost autocratic.
Yeah.
And here's an example that a school in Canada published a list of costumes which kids shouldn't dress up in. And I'll read out the list as they've published it. They've said, you can't dress up as cowboys and Indians, slaves, terrorists, gypsies, and Rastafarians. Now, this is... And there are many other examples in Canada.
Do you think that people should dress up as those things?
No, I'm saying that for a school to actually prescribe that you can't dress up as this, this and this...
Because when I read that list, I thought... And I have some sympathy for what you're saying, Maajid, and I read the blog that this is all based on by this mother, Sashi Ferris, and there are things in there I agreed with, and there are things I disagreed with.
I feel sorry for her daughter, to be
well,
honest. She ended up having to go as Mickey Mouse.
She tied herself in knots, right? Because it's not perfect, and I don't think... I'm not the police. I don't go around telling children what they can and can't wear. However, where I agree with her is that I think this is all about context. I agree this isn't about segregating cultures, but it is about context. So I was interested that you mentioned this is not blackface. Do you think there's something wrong with blackface?
If it's done out of mockery, yes.
Exactly. Context. So in the past, people have dressed up as other cultures as a way of making fun of them and caricaturing them. I grew up seeing people... I grew up with very few black people around me, but at fancy dress parties, people would put blackface on and afro wigs and hold a spliff, and it was all a big joke. And, that was one of the only times I saw people referencing my cultural heritage, and I found that difficult. So if it's done in a spirit of mockery, then it's problematic. If it's in a context where people don't actually know about a culture, they have no curiosity in it, and I think that's the Moana issue. How much do people know about Polynesian culture other than the Disney version?
And this is where I think when Karan said it's gone too far, that's the point, because by saying gone too far is an implicit acknowledgement that there are times where this conversation is valid. So, for example, cultural theft. I recently watched a film, Ghost in the Shell, and then read the reviews and agreed with lots and lots of the reviews that they could have cast a Japanese person in that role instead of casting Scarlett Johansson, because it was filmed in Japan and there are plenty of good Japanese actors and it's a Japanese story. So when cultural theft is a valid critique from a cultural criticism perspective of this,
far do you go?
But you shouldn't police it.
For example, is Sacha Baron Cohen playing Ali G?
No. Absolutely.
offensive?
No, this is what I'm saying. First of all, you can't police it anyway. It's impossible to police. It's only ever going to be a conversation. But especially in the examples I gave, where this young daughter was looking up to Moana, wanted to aspire to be like Moana, because the story is of a young girl finding her own courage to find her own path. There's absolutely nothing wrong, and there was clearly no mockery involved in that young child wanting to dress like Moana from the Disney cartoon.
What I thought was sad was that, you know, kids are not aware of colour or prejudice or bias. They just don't see it. And this woman sat her child down and she got into a heavy discussion about cultural appropriation, about race, about the privilege of whiteness.
She made her
she made her say colour. And I thought, and I just think, you know, let her. All little kids want to be princesses. I mean, there was one quote where the little girl said, "Can I be Elsa from Frozen?" And Elsa's got like a long blonde plait, and she said, "You can be Elsa without the plait." No, you can't. You've got to be Elsa with a blonde plait.
Carole. I don't agree that kids don't see colour. I think if you are a majority in a majority, you know, if you're a white person in a majority white country, you probably don't see colour. If you're the only Polynesian kid in a very white community and everyone suddenly dresses up as Moana, you're conscious that you are the only person from that culture and that people are starting to use it. Now, if that's being done in a respectful way where they're curious about the culture and want to celebrate it, that's one thing. If it's to mock it, that's another. You know, if you are a minority, you're very aware that you're the only person who looks
This girl was made to feel that she was
different.
belittling and insulting the Polynesian community. She wasn't. She just wanted to go to a party as a princess. It could have been any princess.
I just want to show you.
There was two.
I just want to show you an image because we've been talking about where things go too far. I'm curious to see what you think of this. This is a burqa fancy dress costume and a response from a woman wearing a burqa who felt that it was disrespectful. So this is a fancy dress costume that many people who are Muslim or not Muslim find offensive. And actually, one thing I want to say in defence of the woman who wrote this blog is that she's a white American woman. She's saying that as white people, we also have a duty to think about the messages we send when we use other people's cultures and costumes. Now, one of the problems I have, this debate is often framed as a problem for minority people. I think it's everyone's responsibility to think about the way we communicate cultures.
I just want to clarify something as a Muslim in this debate. That's not Muslim culture. That's Saudi Arabian culture, but Muslim culture is as diverse as there are Muslims in the world. And so if one takes offence at Saudi Arabian culture being mocked, then I'd argue that actually you're mocking power, because in Saudi Arabia, that dress is enforced by law and women are punished for not dressing like that. So it deserves mockery.
But you're also doing it in a context where there is a lot of prejudice towards Muslim people.
But there are countries that will lash
context.
women for not dressing like that. So if we laugh at the Life of Brian, if we laugh at the Book of Mormon, if we laugh at other power structures being mocked, including white supremacy, we should be able to mock that power structure.
That is a critique of
that is a critique of power. No,
Arabia.
it's a critique of power.
To your point, it's a critique of power. What about this one? What do you think of this outfit? Is that appropriate? Because that's David Walliams. In my opinion, it's a bit lame, actually. He's supposed to be Kim Jong-un. He's not done a particularly good job, but is that appropriate? Is it not? Rocket Man.
Yeah. The beloved leader.
Isn't it a good idea to borrow things from other people's cultures? Isn't that good? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
And sometimes to mock them.
Yes,
when it's power you're mocking, it's important.
I think we get distracted by the clothes, right? This isn't about the clothes. It's about the power, as we were saying. And the problem is...
For this girl, it was about the clothes. For this little girl, it was about the clothes.
Lives in a society where cultures are not equal, where some cultures are still surrounded by prejudice and bigotry.
Okay, so you're the mother. What would you say to the girl? If you're the mother, if you're Sashi Ferris, who's the mother?
My daughter, who's a beautiful little black girl with afro hair, has a blonde Elsa braid. Yeah. This is a source of some consternation because all her friends...
For who?
For us, because she's the only, or one of the only children in her school who has hair like that, and lots of the other children do have blonde braids, and she often says, I wish my hair were more like these other little girls, because that's what princesses look like. Now, I haven't
That's not to do with
her.
colour. Every kid wants different hair from the one
Carole,
they've got. It's not to do with
a
colour.
society where the predominant message of what beautiful is and what a princess looks like is a little blonde girl.
I grew up wishing my hair was...
That's just reality.
I mean, I grew up with everyone wishing their hair was like mine, because Michael Jackson was massive in those days. I mean, it can work both ways, and actually, it's just about who you look up to, really. That's all it is, who you aspire to be like in terms of role models. This little girl saw Moana and aspired to be like her, and that's innocent. There's nothing wrong with that, you know.
I'm sure we'll return to this issue as long as I have breath to breathe. After the break, it's me, and I'll be arguing why the poppy is losing its meaning. How How many of you know that the first shot in the First World War was fired by a soldier from my country of heritage, Ghana? The events of the global warfare of the last 100 years have affected us all. Personally, I wear a poppy to remember the suffering and sacrifice that so many of our loved ones and compatriots endured. But this should be a matter of choice. In my lifetime, I've noticed slow and gradual poppy tyranny, which should be a contradiction in terms. Those who don't embrace the poppy get bullied, harassed and labelled unpatriotic. Everybody from TV presenters and footballers to ordinary people in the street therefore feel they have to wear one. This is robbing the poppy of its meaning. How can you tell if someone is wearing one through conscience or because they feel they have to? And that's not what people died for, so that their memory would become a weapon in itself. The poppy was, after all, intended to be a symbol of freedom and peace. This year, I hope people will choose to remember the wars of the past and hope for future peace. But wearing a poppy should be a choice.
It's like religion, isn't it? Once something is enforced by law, it doesn't become about the devotion to the thing. It doesn't become voluntary anymore. And I think it's important that people often accuse those on the left wing of being virtue signallers. But this is a kind of virtue signalling that's coming from some people who consider themselves patriots. And I think it's important. I notice we're all wearing poppies. It's important it's voluntary because that means we had dedicated a thought to those who lost their lives in one of the most significant moments in our history. So I agree entirely with what you said. I just wanted to move the conversation slightly to a related topic, and that is this thing called white poppy that has come out, and it's apparently by this pacifist organisation. And I've got a few concerns. I believe in peace, obviously, but I've got a few concerns with it. And one is there's a danger it juxtaposes the actual traditional red poppy as being against peace, as being for war, when actually this was a war to keep the peace. Yeah. And that's important to remember. I think also, if they were to do this, I'm concerned they launched it at the same time, and their appeal is during the same time as the poppy appeal, and so it's in competition with the red poppy. They could have dedicated another week to it during the year. And thirdly, the funds, the money. This and all the money we give to this goes to the veterans, but the White Poppy's money goes to their own organisation, which is a pacifist organisation, and they use that to teach children in school that war is always wrong. I don't believe that. If I was alive when Hitler were alive, I would have volunteered, and you'd find me over there trying to defeat the Nazis. War isn't always wrong. Sometimes war is just, and it's needed to keep the peace.
So we've got to remember what this is all about, and we are still in the midst of the centenary of remembering and commemorating the First World War, where, you know, the sacrifices were made. You mentioned about the first shot being fired. For 6 years, I chaired the committee of the memorial gates next to Buckingham Palace, and that is to remember the service and sacrifice of the 5 million who served from South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, which is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, from Africa and the Caribbean. 5 million people served as volunteers. Over 1 million Indians alone in the First World War. And, you know, they weren't allowed to become officers unless they were doctors. And this is to remember their service and sacrifice. You know, there are 1 or 2 years since the Second World War where the British Army has not been in active service. I mean, the Afghanistan war, if you want to call it that, was longer than the First and Second World Wars put together. So this is for our service people. This is, I mean, and they serve us. I mean, they call it the services, they serve us. And this is to remember what they do, remember their daily service, their daily sacrifice, and to remember war. And it is about peace, and it is about the welfare. The money from this millions of pounds a year goes from the poppy appeal for the welfare of our armed forces and our veterans. And I think it's wonderful that this country does it. And of course, people do it out of choice. No one can force anyone to do this, but it's wonderful what this country does.
No one should shame anyone out of not doing it.
On that note, sorry, just before you guys come in, can I just read you something from Jon Snow, the TV presenter, because he is one of the people who has come under a lot of pressure for not wearing a poppy. And this is the reason that he's given for doing it. He says, I'm begged to wear an AIDS ribbon, a breast cancer ribbon, a Marie Curie flower, you name it, from the Red Cross to the RNIB. They send me stuff to wear to raise awareness, and I don't. And in those terms, and on those terms alone, I do not and will not wear a a poppy. I just raise that because there definitely is this current that you are expected to wear one. And I think it sounds like, well, so far, those we've spoken agree that it should be a matter of conscience. That's the whole point, that we actually have an act of remembrance.
I disagree with that sentiment that he's saying, because I think that actually, so for example, when I had children, I will be making sure my children wear poppies. They will not be allowed to not wear one, because I see it as the ultimate sign of respect for people whose life have been taken or deeply affected by the service and the sacrifice that they've made to allow us the life that we lead today. And I feel very strongly about that. And when he quotes things like breast cancer ribbons or AIDS wristbands or all the other things, actually, those things are tragic illnesses and problems and all the rest. I'm not undermining that. But actually, every single one of us is blessed to live as free as we do because, in lots of ways, of the sacrifice that people have made. It's not the same, breast cancer and all the rest of it, that's terrible. But for me, I don't see the two things on the same level.
And we wouldn't be having this conversation around this table in the way that we are without their service and sacrifice.
Exactly.
Well, there's another angle to this, and this is somebody who tweeted about the poppy being co-opted by politicians in the war on terror. Let's have a look at the tweet. It's an interesting perspective. I wouldn't... Harry Leslie Smith says, I'm against wearing of the poppy because it's been co-opted in the war on terror and eroding democracy. I wouldn't go that far to say that means we shouldn't wear the poppy. I think this is another side to the politicisation of the debate, and actually the truth is the poppy should remain apolitical. It's as you've correctly said, it's to remember the sacrifice of our troops, and they don't make the decisions where they are deployed. They don't get to make the decision to go into Iraq or into Afghanistan. It's the soldier's job to serve. It's not the soldier's job to decide where war is launched. And I always oppose the Iraq war.
Willing to make the ultimate sacrifice on our behalf.
Yeah.
What do you think, Carole?
It's a very emotional time for me in the lead-up to Remembrance Day. It's really simple for me. I'm like you, there's no choice for me. I wear it out of pride and gratitude and respect and regret. And it really hacks me up when people like Jon Snow bring his principles, his thoughts, his beliefs into this. We don't care what he thinks or believes. This is about honouring the people who died for this country. It's very simple. The men who went to war, their beliefs didn't matter, what they thought didn't count. They were conscripted and they went to fight for the country, and that's what they did. And this is a time to just respect them. It's not a time to question what they did, to question the folly of war, to talk about the commitment to peace. We all know that. This is the one time in the year that we actually get to remember and to thank them, and we should just get on and do that. There's this lovely old guy here called Ron Jones, who's on screen. He's 100 years old. Ron is an Auschwitz survivor, and every year for the past 30 years, he sells poppies in his local supermarket. That's how much it means to him. That's how much he cares. And people like Jon Snow ought to wear. I'm very suspicious of people who don't wear poppies. I don't like them for the reason that I don't think they appreciate. I don't think they have gratitude.
But John's not saying that he doesn't remember, but he's just saying that he doesn't choose to express his remembrance in that way. I mean, isn't that the point? That if everyone feels that they have to wear it, then it loses its meaning.
They shouldn't feel they have to. They should feel they should wear it.
But you can't tell people how they should feel. It has to come from them. That's the point.
They should still feel that they should wear it.
Right, well, we're popping off for a break. Do you see what I did there? And after the break, I'll be telling big corporations that we have had enough of their rubbish. Now, whilst I won't be dashing out to vote for the Green Party at the next election, I do like to think of myself as a bit of an eco-warrior. I take great pride in making sure that I recycle my household waste, whether it's crisp packets, drink bottles, coffee cups, or, let's be honest, wine bottles. Into the recycling it goes. Imagine the disappointment I felt then when I realised I may have been wasting my time. Plenty of the stuff that I've been sending to recycling simply cannot be recycled because the packaging is too damn complicated. There's talk of a new consumer levy being introduced to stop us using things like disposable coffee cups. But frankly, I am fed up with us consumers having to shoulder the burden of what should be paid for by manufacturers. It's time for them to step up to the plate and start using packaging that doesn't cost the earth.
There's no question about it that there's huge amounts of waste. I think it's wrong to say that companies do not take responsibility. I mean, in my industry, with beer bottles, people say, oh, they're new beer bottles, but they don't realise that actually well over 50% of the glass used in making a new beer bottle is recycled glass. Initiatives that have been taken by the government, for example, the 5 pence being charged for carrier bags, has actually reduced consumption by 85%. I mean, I wish that would happen around the world, because when you travel around the world, you see the waste of carrier bags and plastic just being thrown, the waste in the oceans. It is criminal. It should not take place. And I think we need to encourage more recycling at every stage. I mean, then there are good initiatives. For example, Jaden Smith has helped launch Just Water in 2008, and this is a company that sells spring water in more planet-friendly bottles. Over just 82% of the Just bottles are made out of renewable resources, and it's 100% recyclable where recycling is available. Now, this is the other thing. Recycling has got to be available everywhere. But again, you get so many examples of what we consume, and if you look at the packaging, the amount of packaging for takeaway food, there's so much of it. You think, why must there be so much packaging?
I've got some packaging I'm going to show you, actually, because for me, why I have a problem with manufacturers, so you talk about the 5 pence carrier bag charge, but actually that's put onto us as consumers. Now, when I go to the supermarket, I'm like some kind of octopus. I can balance stuff in places and crevices that you didn't even know I had. However, why should that pressure be put onto me as a consumer? Why aren't manufacturers pressured more into being told, listen, you've got to come up with a biodegradable example or a fully recyclable example? Because when I put stuff like this away into recycling, which I do, I just assume I can recycle this because it's paper or card.
You ate it earlier, clearly.
Yeah, but I never stop eating. But things like this, the film, it makes it unrecyclable because it's too complex. Stuff like this, in the recycling, I would definitely put that into recycling. You can't recycle this. You can recycle this bit, but because this has got springs and stuff in it, it doesn't. So it just doesn't get recycled. Now, this was a surprising one for me, is this. I always recycle stuff like that. You can't, because when this goes through the recycling plants in most places, the infrared scanner can't pick this up because of its colouring. So into the bin it goes.
Wow. I mean, there are some simple solutions to that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
to the manufacturers to be doing more.
So the manufacturers, again, as I say, as a manufacturer myself, as a proud manufacturer, there are a lot of regulations, and by the way, a lot of them are EU regulations, and they're very good regulations to encourage us to be much more eco-friendly in every way. And I gave one example of the bottles. The way that we recycle making beer, for example, every single part of it virtually is recycled. Even the waste from the producing of the beer goes to make Marmite,
which
for
I love.
example. And the water, the usage of water. We continue to work to use less water when you're producing beer. It takes a lot of water to produce the beer, let alone the water that's actually in the beer. So a bottled water that we produce, we make sure that it's in glass. So that, it's not exported at all. So it's only sold within the UK. So you can make steps like that, and all the bottled glass is recyclable.
It's consumer and manufacturer behaviour, isn't it?
Yes.
Yesterday I was in Boots, and I was in the queue in Boots to buy something, and there was this guy in front of me, and it was not the pharmacist counter, it was the normal counter. So they said, would you like a bag? And he said, I want one of the paper bags that you use to give medicines, because you don't have to pay for a paper bag. And they said, no, sorry, at this counter we only have plastic bags, and that will be 5 pence. And I don't know his circumstances, but I suspect he could have afforded 5p for a bag. And he just refused. He said, I want to speak to the manager. I want a paper. I'm not paying for a bag. And, you know, those of us behind him in the queue, we're
quite frustrated.
We're impressed. It did make me think it's so interesting how powerful it
Would you have felt differently
if
you didn't argue it on the cost, but on the fact that paper is biodegradable?
Principle, yeah.
I suspect he wouldn't have argued it had it not been for the cost. And that's the point.
But if he had made an environmental
5p
argument, would it change your perspective on his position?
Yeah, I suppose I would have been less, slightly, marginally less
still need to
annoyed.
get to
It's just that he was trying to say... But it's good, though, because that's the point of the 5p for plastic bags, is that it... Even though you can afford 5p, it's disincentivising.
So actually, there's a funny thing here, which is that a recent survey found that actually the people that are most conscious about the environment, of course we all should be, there's nothing to disagree with what's being said here, but the people that are the most conscious happen also to be perhaps generally of the elite of that crowd, people that also eat less meat because they're conscious about the fact that meat uses a lot of water, are the same people, coincidentally, who have the biggest carbon footprint because they fly around the world more, because they're in the global elite class, they're all educated and had to actually running around the world doing business deals. And so on the one hand, they're recycling their rubbish, they're eating less meat, they're concerned about eco-friendly policies in their micro lives, but their behaviour in the kind of climate that they're in is leaving a larger carbon footprint. And that does leave me with the conclusion that there does need to be a combination of consumer behaviour and government regulation and, on the company side, manufacturer side as well.
One area, it's an important point you made, this is one area where I believe there are people who are sceptics about climate change or don't believe in it. This has got nothing to do with that. I think everyone from childhood, from school, should be brought up to be environmentally friendly, with waste like this, to be able to recycle as much as possible, not to litter. I think that's got to be, everyone around the world's got to be brought up in that way. It's a must.
What do you think, Carole?
I'm quite surprised by some of the things that you've said there, because for the blue bottle, I thought that was recyclable. And what I've learned is that, and things like the Pringles cartons, those Pringles cartons, the Lucozade bottles, none of those are recyclables, so presumably that just all goes into landfill. I mean, how much goes into landfill?
But also, I just want to show you some images. This is from the Sky Ocean Rescue campaign, and this is from Mumbai in India. And, we have issues here, but actually, in the developing world, where they don't have either waste processing or recycling facilities as well developed, it's literally just taking over the environment. And actually, one of the most scandalous things is that countries like Britain are shipping waste to developing countries, which is illegal, but it is happening. So, I don't know where all those plastic bags come from, but, the consequences can be really dramatic.
Indeed. Anyway, right, we've just got time for our Straight Talker of the Week. And even if you haven't heard of Peter Morgan, you've probably heard of his hit series, The Crown. I haven't. He may be a very successful writer, but I don't think he'll be kneeling before Her Majesty to receive an award for diplomatic language anytime soon. In an interview this week, he described the Queen as a countryside woman of limited intelligence who would have much preferred looking after her dogs and breeding horses to being Queen. Wow, he certainly didn't hold back. So for that, Mr. Morgan, you are our Straight Talker of the Week. Off with your head.
How wrong of him to do that. By the way, his programme is brilliant. The Crown is fantastic. But the Queen is... He cannot say that about the Queen. The Queen is wonderful, and this whole country loves Her Majesty.
She may well be. That doesn't point to her intelligence, may I add.
And she is very intelligent.
Do not necessarily correlate.
I can say firsthand she's highly intelligent, got a great sense of humour, and we should be proud of her.
Indeed.
And we're lucky to have her.
Right, well, that's it for this week. I'm off to go and watch The Crown. But don't forget, you can follow The Pledge on Twitter and find us on Facebook. See you next week.